All right, welcome to the Spring 2016 Literature at Our House Open House. And this evening, what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk to you a little bit about literature at our house. And there's going to be one particular topic that I'm going to focus on. It's actually going to be a wide-ranging topic, but with an interesting structure to it. And so that will help us kind of review a little bit of what's been done. Also, for those of you who are new, to give you a feel for what the classes are like, what the structure is like, what the basic approach to teaching literature and learning literature is. And then the second part of the big presentation is going to be what's in store for next year. Now, we also have a special guest, Scott Powell from History at Our House is here, and he will talk a couple minutes about History at Our House. And I'm bringing him in because history and literature, as you're going to see, are very interconnected, and especially for our two programs. And he's going to be having an open house coming up next Thursday, and I'm going to invite everybody to go to that to check that out if you aren't already familiar with History at Our House. So, for this evening, the topic is going to be frequently asked questions. And it's a topic that I've been thinking a lot about. It's something I want to add to the website. And they're questions that I've gotten over and over again. And maybe you might have these questions. And hopefully they will be informative for you. And I think these questions will also give a sense of what the whole program is about. And maybe the first question is, Luke Travers, who are you? So for those of you that don't know me, that haven't met me, that couldn't pick me out from a crowd, I just want to tell you a couple things about myself. I've been teaching literature at our house for 3 years. This is my third year doing this, creating the curriculum, putting together the classes, and teaching it. And my other business is Touching the Art, which is an art appreciation tours, art appreciation courses, and I know some of you through that rather than Literature at Our House, so some of you are coming to the Literature at Our House through Touching the Art. And that's based on a book I wrote on art appreciation. And my approach to literature and my approach to art appreciation have some definite parallels to them. I have been doing Touching the Art tours and so forth for about 10 years. And I've been teaching literature for 11 years now. Prior to Literature at Our House, I taught at a small private school in Southern California called Van Damme Academy, where I was very fortunate enough to be able to create my own curriculum. And I had a lot of freedom to experiment, to try things out, to see what worked well with students, and to kind of go a little bit against the norm, against what standard English classes are like. Because if you ask me, my favorite subject in junior high or in high school or in elementary school wasn't the English classes. I didn't like school very much. And one of the things that I'm hoping with this program is that I'm offering an approach to literature, to the arts, that is something that students get engaged in. So that's a little bit about me. Now, a little bit about how we're going to organize the evening just very quickly. I'll start off, let me get this, with the short presentation. This will take about 10-15 minutes. And then after this short presentation, Mr. Powell will speak a couple minutes. And then I'm going to go into plans for next year. And we'll look at the books for next year, the schedule, and I'll talk a little bit about possible summer camps. And then there'll be time for questions if you have any. And also, if you have any questions as we're going along, one great way to do it is to raise your hand. And some of you are familiar with that function. If you want to test that function out right now, there is a little hand icon, and you can click on that hand to test it out. And Once it goes up, I can lower it. So just for you to get an idea. And if you do have a question as we're going along, raise your hand and I'll get to it. All right. So what are the most frequently asked questions I get? Here they are. I won't hold any suspense. These four. The first one, how do I pick out the books and the poems? What are my standards for picking them out? And what are they? And why do I pick certain ones over others? Next question, and this is, I think, one that I get a lot. Why do I spend 10 to 15 classes on a single book? And we read about 6 to 8 books per year, and I get the question often, why don't we read more books? And I'll have some answers for that. And then another big question is, what is a class like for students? And you have a sense of it right now at the online platform, but what is the day-to-day business of the class? What kinds of activities do we do? What are the typical types of things? What kind of interactions do we have? What are the assignments? And then finally, I offer a writing workshop in addition to the literature class. And one of the main questions I get there is, what do we do in the writing workshop? What's it for? And how is it connected to what we do in the literature classes? All right. Do those questions look like questions that you've maybe had? I think they're going to be a good starting off point for discussion. All right, great. Thanks for the feedback in the chat. I love that feedback. Okay, now, for the first question. How do I pick out the books and poems that we read? And at the bottom here, I've got a quick selection of books from the upper elementary class this year on the left-hand side, and books from the junior high class this year that I've got on the right-hand side. And the first main standard by which I pick out the books is they've got to have themes and characters that are meaningful to the student's life and their growth. So I don't pick books that are going to be considered classics, but might not connect easily to the students' lives. And I don't pick books that are just simply a lot of fun to read. And they have a place. But I want to find something that is going to be more meaningful than just something that you're going to just tear through like your favorite TV show. There's got to be some meaning to them that fits with the student's life at whatever level or stage in their life they are. So that's the first main thing. Second thing is integration with history. And if you notice at the beginning, next year is going to be the European history year. And the literature course goes in a 3-year cycle. So there's the European history year. Then the following year is the American history year. And then after that, the ancient history year. And we're on the ancient history year right now. We're finishing up the ancient history year. And that corresponds with what Mr. Powell is doing in the History at Our House. And in a few moments, he'll give you a brief little tidbit about History at Our House. So you can see some of the books that are included. For example, The Golden Goblet is set in ancient Egypt, Anne of Byzantium set in the Byzantine Empire, and of course Greek myths, then Antigone in the Odyssey. And then the integration with history is not all-inclusive. There are some things that don't tie in with history. Pygmalion, for example, is late 19th century, early 20th century England. But thematically, there are some things that are going to come back and tie into some of the myths or some of the other stories that we read. So the books that we read don't necessarily have to be part of that time period, but that's definitely one of the standards that we use. Now for the junior high class, something I want to reiterate, the junior high class, we do classics. We don't do young adult fiction. We do fiction that was written for adults. But we don't do classics for the sake of doing classics. They're two very important points that I want to make sure that we get in the books we pick out. They've got to have dramatic plots. Once you get into them, you've got to be intrigued and interested, and you've got to want to keep reading. There's got to be an exciting plot. And then the themes have to be relatable. So even for something like Pygmalion, which is about class and about personal identity, which may seem a little bit more remote for a 12 or 13-year-old, the topic of what makes you who you are, whether it is the way people see you or your own spirit, that's something that's very relevant for a 12 to 13-year-old. And if the classic has something that we can reach into and connect to our lives, junior high students' lives, then that is a worthy book for us to read. So, and the same would go for Antigone or the Odyssey. And if you have specific questions about some of the selections I pick and how they would connect to a junior high student's life and how I'd make that integration, you're more than welcome to ask. And then for poetry, the poetry that we incorporate is going to be thematically connected to the novels and plays that we read. I use poetry as a way to draw out certain themes, and I'll give an example of that a little bit later on. Okay, so any questions so far about how I pick books and poets? All right, thanks, Ashley. Okay, next question. Why do I spend 10 to 15 classes on a single book? Why not read more books? All right, so I've got a two-part answer to this. Here's the first part. The goal is to get the most out of the experience of our reading, both in understanding the deeper meaning of the stories and the relevance of that meaning to our lives. So we spend a lot of time not just understanding what's going on in the story, and some of these stories are pretty complex, and we have to have a little bit of historical background, and we have to grasp what the characters' motivations are, which stretches our thinking a little bit. But also, it's an opportunity for us to ponder and to contemplate how the characters in these stories, how the events in these stories connect to our lives and gives us insight into our own lives. And we can pick up a novel and read it quickly, and it can help us improve our reading skills. But what we want to have the opportunity to do is to think about what we're reading, think about experiences. Life experiences go by fast, and we don't get the opportunity to process them often. So the literature class is an opportunity for us to process other people's lives to gain insight. Now, here's a follow-up question that I'd often get. Why not discuss the book after you read it? And I know this is something that other programs do, where you get 50 novels and a student picks up a novel, they read it, and then afterwards they have a class or two where they discuss the meaning of the novel. That can have some value. But here is what the power of literature is. The power of literature is not only that you get to contemplate the meaning of these characters' lives, but also that you get to experience with them. So the reason why we go through step by step through a novel and not just simply read it and then after talk about it, is because you have a more powerful experience if you understand what you're reading while you're reading it than if you understand it afterwards. So if you go through the experience of a story and then you say, I didn't really get that, and then you have a discussion and say, oh, now I get it, that is not going to be as meaningful to you as if 2/3 through the book, you have the discussion about what these characters want, what the possible outcomes are, what would it mean if it turned out one way, and then when it does turn out and you understand fully what's going on in the climax of that story, then you combine your understanding and the emotion. And that's the power of literature. Yeah, Christina, so we pace out the literature. And what usually happens is we start off a little bit more slowly. And then once we get a feel, because the challenging part of literature is at the beginning when you don't know who the characters are and the story hasn't picked up. But we get a feel for everything, and then we pick up the reading. And towards the end, we slow down maybe a little bit more before we reach the climax. All right. Any other questions about the deliberate process? And I'll fill in a couple of examples in just a few moments. All right. So what is a class like for students? So the classroom setup is like you have it here. And if you were students, what would happen is also you would be unmuted. And you would also have writing control. And at the beginning of a typical class, what I have the students do is let me know their response to the readings. So we read a couple chapters, and then I put up a blank whiteboard like this, and I put up a couple of boxes, and I ask them, okay, in the first box, write down your highlights. In the second box, write down any confusions you have. And that gives me a sense of what they're picking up and maybe how to steer the discussion a little bit more. The second thing we do after we have that initial discussion is what I call the challenge questions. And I've got an example here. I'll give you a close-up. So we're reading The Winslow Boy right now in the upper elementary class. And you can kind of see the setup and the kinds of questions that we ask. And these questions are there to dive a little bit more deeply into the characters. I'll just show that to you for just a moment. But that's typically every class we have that set up and questions to go along with it. Now, third thing for a typical class is then afterwards, towards the end, we might prepare for a writing assignment, which are often short paragraphs based on discussion, or we might do a little bit of reading aloud. And I find reading aloud to be very valuable, especially when we're reading plays. So 5 to 10 minutes of reading aloud, something like that. Now, other class activities besides the typical. I like playing games. I like playing games that will help us understand the characters of our story, but also help us branch out and make connections everywhere. So a couple of games I like are the name game, which is a quick way of remembering character names and their dominant traits. And then one game I like to play, especially towards the end of the year, is Crazy Character Combos, which we pair up two characters that seemingly have nothing to do with each other from one novel in one universe and another novel in another universe, and see some kind of integration, whether it's a big difference or big similarity between the two. Integrating stories, integrating themes, connecting characters, that's one of the big things that we spend a lot of time doing. And we do that also a lot with art. So I introduce art appreciation. We do readings of artworks, and those readings, just like the poems, are thematically connected to what we're reading in the novel, certain characters. And then also for the poetry, we study the poem. We go very deliberately through the poem and understanding it, and the students also have an opportunity to get on video and recite their poem. So there's a lot of interaction in the class, a lot of back and forth, but also a lot of directed thought on the topics. And just a couple of quick examples I'll share. In the reading of Antigone that the junior high did, and Timothy, you'll remember this, we did the poem Prometheus by Byron, and this is just the first part. And Prometheus is the poem of whose theme is defying a tyrant, which we could see connected well with Antigone. And then we took it one step further and we did a writing assignment where we combined, you might recognize like the Boston Tea Party here, Rosa Parks here, and this is a scene from the Iliad. We wrote an assignment integrating moments to define a tyrant. And one more quick description of how we tie in the plays to art and also to other literature. So towards the beginning of the year, we read the myths, Greek myths, including the myth of Pygmalion. And we recently finished the play Pygmalion. And as a way to understand the deeper meaning of the play Pygmalion, we did a comparison between the story of the sculptor who didn't like women, who sculpted his perfect woman, and she comes to life and they fall in love happily ever after. And we compared that to the play Pygmalion, where there is something very different going on. So whatever we start reading at the beginning of the year, it always comes back up. We're continually looking to make connections and integrations to deepen our understanding. And then the last question, concerning writing assignments. I love writing assignments. I think they're a wonderful way of solidifying your thoughts on a certain topic. And the reason why I developed a writing workshop is because I found that the literature classes, there just wasn't enough time to properly do writing assignments. We do have occasional writing assignments in the literature classes, a couple times a month, maybe once a week, something like that. But there is so much of an overflow of topics and interesting things to think about, to put on paper, that I created the writing workshop for that. So the writing workshop is an extension of the literature class. The thinking and writing we do are based on the discussions from literature class. And what the workshop allows us to do is it gives us more time to write. Also, we do a lot of peer feedback. So you write a paragraph, then we read over those paragraphs together as a class, and then we also do some rewriting and spend some time on structure and style. And just as a quick example, let me see if I can get that link to you. Earlier in the year, the junior high students wrote their own myth based on the Greek myths that they've read, and there is a blog for that. And let me show you that. I'll give you a link to that more easily than what's there. So there's a link in the chat if you want to click on that and save that. That will give you a good idea of the types of writing assignments and the creativity that the students have. The goal of the writing workshop is not primarily to be able to write more grammatically or more in a better style, but more to get your thoughts down on paper, to clarify your thinking about things, and to find kind of your voice when you're writing. give you a kind of confidence and an enjoyment of writing. All right. Those are the 4 questions I have. Any questions on those frequently asked questions? See a couple. Okay. How many days a week is a class? So the upper elementary and the junior high, 3 days a week. So Cynthia, my experience with reluctant writers, and I've got some reluctant writers in my writing workshops, and it depends on the student, I think. I think some students just have a hard time getting started. Some students feel maybe a pressure of having something be perfect. And one of the things that I try to do is I try to do creative writing assignments that will allow them not to overthink their writing. So one type of creative writing assignment that I do is a free writing exercise to music, to classical music. And I have the students picture in their mind, in their mind's eye, images that are evoked by the emotions of the music. And then you just start describing whatever you're imagining. So for reluctant writers, my solution is often freedom of constraints. And then afterwards, when they've got something down, we can work with that. And one of the assignments that one of my students called this a sneaky assignment was I played 3 different pieces of music, and I had them pick a character from Greek mythology and to set that character to the music and imagine the movie going on. And the 3 pieces of music had very different emotional tones, and it kind of came out to be a 3-part story. So I'm still learning ways to engage students, but I feel like the writing workshop is something that is meant to be fun and to get them to really enjoy the writing. All right, any other questions there? So if there are 2 or more siblings, would they, good question. So I would say it depends. I think in general, yes, because there's a lot of back and forth, whether it's the students are typing in the chat or answering questions vocally, or writing on the whiteboard. So that would be preferable. But I have had siblings also participate together, and it's worked out. It's worked out. So one's ideal, the other one is doable. All right, I'll take more questions a little bit later, but right now what I want to do is, as I said, one of the main ways that I pick out books is with the integration to history. And I'd like to hand over the mic to Mr. Powell from History at Our House for a couple of minutes. So, Mr. Powell, let me get you on video. Let's see, go ahead and unmute yourself to let me know that you're ready.
All right, can you hear me?
Yeah, and let me get you and go off.
Okay. Hi. All right, how's that? Oh, hold on a second. I think.
All right.
Am I there? Am I there now?
Yeah, you just, okay, yeah.
I know what I did there. Okay, and if you don't mind, I'd also like to add one whiteboard. So help me to do that, Mr. Travers.
All right.
I have the whiteboard there, and then then I upload an image. Thank you. Now, Mr. Travers and I use similar software programs. He uses something called WizIQ, and we're all logged into that right here and now. I use a slightly different kind. I'm not able to do the upload at this time, Mr. Travers. I'm on whiteboard 6, and I can't click that button.
Oh,
As if
I'm
I
sorry. My fault. Let me get to.
Okay.
I apologize. I didn't give you writing control.
No, that's right, and that's these types of programs, these online classrooms or online meetings are pretty tricky to
There you go. You should be
get
good now.
configured that way. Okay, great. So just give me a sec here as I find the appropriate document. Too long. I got it in its own folder there. Okay, good. So let's see if that comes up and how well that does. All right, I hope everybody's able to see that. Okay, good. And so here, I don't want to take up too much of your time because this is Mr. Travers' presentation on literature at our house, and I really appreciate him giving me an opportunity to just chime in a little bit here. I think he and I have had very similar experiences, probably very similar to the ones that many of you parents have had in terms of literature and in terms of history as subjects that we had in school. I didn't like those subjects. And so it's nice to be working alongside him here to try to reclaim these two indispensable subjects. I'm really convinced that history and literature both, or just in generally what we call the humanities, are really have been neglected and certainly have not advanced the way that the STEM subjects that seem to define our culture today have, and I think we are suffering for that. And so Mr. Travers is doing his best to re-enliven and reclaim the subject of literature, and that's what I'm trying to do with history at our house. And so let's just talk briefly here today. The slide that I put on the screen, which I hope you're able to see, is really hopefully is kind of an exciting or maybe even a jarring kind of visual for you, and it presents the work that I'm trying to do in the subject of history, and I call it present centrism. That is my philosophy of history. And I want to discuss today a little bit, just very briefly, how that connects up with what Mr. Travers is doing, because there is a traditional concept of how literature and history connect. And I think Mr. Travers and I both agree with that general concept. And that would be that as Mr. Travers does, you pick the best literature available. A lot of that is from ancient Greece. A lot of that is from Europe. And so you are learning about very distant cultures and people. And so we call that classical. And in history, you're learning about the same cultures from a different angle. You're learning about the events of those cultures. And so Mr. Travers was teaching Antigone this year, and Mr. Bao, I am teaching Greek democracy, right? And so we are both transporting our students into that very distant context. And then the traditional idea of how those kind of fit together is that, well, the history gives you context. The history allows you to kind of interpret things that you're seeing and better recognize the situations and the society in which things are unfolding. And then literature then kind of also feeds back on history. Typically kind of gives you a really concrete vision of what life would be like for characters, gives you maybe a more personal sense of the past. And so that's what I call the traditional view of the way that these two subjects intertwine. And I think Mr. Travers and I both agree with that view. But what I just briefly want to say here tonight is I think that that's not enough. And I think that for those of you who are interested in both literature at our house and history at our house, I think that there is a potential synergy and power that can come from these subjects being taught properly and your kids being exposed to these subjects properly that goes far beyond that. and that is really deeply rooted in what I call present centrism in history. And Mr. Powell, Mr. Travers was speaking about how he encourages the students to make connections between the characters and the story they encounter in literature and their own lives. This is very much the type of idea that I'm striving for in present centrism, which is to say, to help the students make the connection between the past and the world that they see around them, and thus their own lives as well. So there's a lot of talk about critical thinking nowadays, and not a lot of people really understand the substance of it. I think the most crucial element of it is this ability to teach students how to integrate, the ability to teach students how to make connections beyond just their immediate context, to reach out and to summon bodies of knowledge and in the case of literature, inspiration and insight into human life beyond what's immediately available to them, and then connect that to their lives. And these subjects, literature, history, they're not just these abstract subjects that make up this education that students can somehow become, in a broad sense, cultured from being exposed to those things. I really believe, and I think I agree with Mr. Travers, that the real point is to make the connection to the student's life, and especially with regard to history, to what they see around them, the world that they are living in, which is a complex and fascinating place. And so this image that I put on here for you, primarily for you as parents, I think we all recognize it, right? We're going to be doing European history in the coming year, and Europe is this remarkable place. It really is the core civilization in all of human history, and it's in crisis today. And it is the image on the right, for those of you who don't recognize it, is from the Brussels terrorist attacks. And my point here, as far as present centrism is concerned, is that Europe is such an important place to understand, regardless of where you are. Of course, being in America, America is a civilization that derives many of its values from Europe, and there's a powerful connection between the two. And that's, again, part of this idea of summoning the past in a way that informs life here and now, encouraging students to make connections. So that's the kind of the brief point that I wanted to make tonight. And I encourage you to join me next week, exactly same time. I can't really say same place. I use a program called WebEx, so we're all going to be online if we join each other then. It won't be with IQ, but you'll be able to see WebEx is kind of the same sort of thing. And then I'd like to elaborate more on what this idea of present centrism is, and then maybe give Mr. Travers a chance to chime in on how he thinks literature complements that. I think he was quite right to say that the connection between them is not all inclusive. They are complementary, and they can really help students to expand their understanding of the world and their own lives and the types of values that they can embrace. And I think that's the way to think of them, as complements that really go well together. I hope that you'll be able to enjoy and use Mr. Travers' program, and if History at Our House fits alongside that, great. And I'd love to be able to help you out in that regard. So hopefully you can join me on April 1st. That's certainly enough time for me. Mr. Travers, I don't know if you have a quick response to that right now. I'd be happy to answer a couple questions, but obviously we need to continue with literature tonight.
Mr. Powell, thank you so much. I hope everybody can see how, yeah.
Oh, thank you, Christina. Yeah, I'm sorry, Luke. Yeah, the point about April 7th, that's a typo. Yes, thank you, Christina. Yeah. Can I change that right now? I don't know. April 7th. Okay, thank you, Christina.
All right. Okay, Mr. Powell, I'm going to turn off your video right now for the moment.
All right.
And so I hope you got a sense from just how effective, how powerful he is as a teacher. I've known him for many, many years, and I've taken history classes from him. So I highly recommend his classes. So April 7th, definitely come check that out. Okay. Now, Mr. Powell, do you want to leave some way that they can some way that people can contact you? All right, great. Thank you. Now, last portion, and we'll take maybe 5 minutes or so. I want to talk a little bit about next year and what next year looks like for the book selections, the class schedule, and some new little innovations. So first off, just for your calendars, the Literature at Our House classes will begin on August 22nd and end on May 31st. And here's the main, I guess, new thing going on with Literature at Our House. Additional sessions of the upper elementary and the junior high classes. Now, the main sessions, junior high 1 and upper elementary 1, are the same times, basically the same times with a slight change for the upper elementary, as they are this year. The writing workshops are at the same times that they are this year. And I've got a second option for upper elementary and junior high. And the reason why I'm going towards adding more classes is because I'm starting to think that the live classes are, for literature, are of much more value than the recordings. And one thing that's going to allow me to be able to do this as well is because this will be I've already taught the European History Year of Literature once online, so I have the material already set for that, and I can expand, I can teach more classes based on the material that I have. And of course, they're tailored a little bit more towards the students that I have. Junior high can start at 6th grade and can go up to 9th grade. And that's based on the student. I have some 6th graders who are in the upper elementary, and I've got some 6th graders who are in the junior high. So that's something that we would talk about. The main thing is finding the best fit for your child. Now, as far as the books for the upper elementary, let me go over here. Here's a sampling of the books and the poems. Now, these are definite books that we will read, and we will read all of these. And there might be one or two others that we might throw in. So they include The Book of Three. I think they're making a Disney remake of the movie, one of my favorite stories to start off with. Stories of King Arthur's Knights. A novelized biography of Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine. One of my favorite children's novels from the Mix-Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler. Yeah, Timothy, you're remembering these? I'm wondering, Timothy, did you have a favorite among these? Hatchet, the story of survival, and The Secret Garden, a beloved classic. And then some poetry, and of course all this poetry it of course integrates with the literature that we do. Any questions there for the upper elementary books? You like that one, yeah. And then for the junior high, here's what's in store. Can junior high students read these too? For the upper elementary books? Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Hatchet, I definitely recommend for. anyway, and mix up files, definitely. Now, for the junior high students, you can see these are all classics. But of course, as I described, they're classics that are picked out with themes that are going to relate to the students' lives and stretch their life, stretch their understanding a little bit. So a novelized version of Beowulf. I'll scroll down a little bit here. Victor Hugo's The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which is one of my favorites to teach. Henrik Ibsen play A Doll's House, which has some similarities to Pygmalion. The Scarlet Pimpernel, The Beloved, The Miracle Worker. Another wonderful play that you wouldn't expect students to get into because it's about 12 men arguing in a room for the whole time, but it's one that is really, really enjoyed. 12 Angry Men, and Cyrano de Bergerac, and some samples of poetry that would go along with that. Any thoughts or questions about the junior high book list? And then there's going to be a high school class. And the high school class is going to be a little bit experimental for me. It's curriculum that I've never taught before, but there's been sufficient demand to start something, and I'm very excited about being able to offer a high school class. And a couple of differences with a high school class would be that it'd meet twice a week. It'd meet twice a week. There would be, of course, more reading and then more writing. There wouldn't be a writing workshop component attached to it, but there would be more writing expected. And these are novels and plays that I'm considering. The list isn't final, but these are some of my favorite and some that I would enjoy teaching and I think that students would love. Count of Monte Cristo, Great Expectations, Anna Karenina, Victor Hugo's The Man Who Laughs, Pergorio by Balzac, and Macbeth. And there are many others, and I'm definitely open to suggestions and hearing more ideas there. But that's something that's a bit more experimental, and the exact time for that's still to be determined. But that's something that if you are interested in, please email me. Now, summer camps. I enjoy giving week-long summer camps that meet every day, 5 days a week, for about an hour or 15 minutes or so. And there are two kinds. I've given art appreciation summer camps that have been a lot of fun, but I'd also like to give a poetry appreciation camp. I'm still working on my summer schedule, but I'm hoping to offer up some weeks for anybody interested in the coming days. And if you are interested, that can be part of an email to me. All right, great. Okay. Any final questions? Any thoughts? Anything else that you want to take a look at that from book lists or anything like that? I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to say an official goodbye to those in the recording, and you guys can stick around as long as you like. So everybody in the recording, thank you for joining me, and please visit Literature at Our House if you have further questions. Registration is going to be available soon. I'm planning on Tuesday to have registration available for next year. Okay, so I'm pausing.